Good afternoon. I want to welcome all of you to our webinar today. My name is Jason Lewis, and I am the founder of Responsive Fundraising. I'm an author, podcast host, and for those of you who haven't heard, one of the rabble-rousers in our space. I share with great pride that fundraising has defined my entire career. I'm all about ensuring that fundraising professionals have the opportunity to be recognized and admired for meaningful work. I believe now, more than ever, that aspiration is critically important. So it's enough about me. We're all very excited that you decided to join us for this second in a three-part conversation about preparing ourselves for the road ahead. And we're delighted that we're delighted to have the three individuals who we believe are some of the best in the industry have agreed to be a part of this series. We're honored today to be joined by Kathy Drucquer Duff, certainly one of the most respected voices in our industry. We are also joined by Teresa Lee, who has certainly become a game changer for us at Responsive. I trust you will all appreciate everything that the three of us have to say today. Before I ask the two of them to introduce themselves, let me summarize our agenda and do a little housekeeping. We plan to be here for about 90 minutes. Kathy, Teresa, and I will begin with a discussion about preparing for the road ahead. I want to ensure all of you that this is not a scripted or outlined conversation. We promise there are no subtle sales pitches. We don't claim to have everything figured out. We just want to have honest, straightforward conversation about where we genuinely believe our profession and the sector is collectively headed. We intentionally set up the time for 90 minutes so as to not just talk amongst ourselves, but to encourage you to join in with us with your comments and questions. Please put your comments and questions in the comment section below, and we will be sure to try to get to as many of them as possible. I think we had a pretty good track record of doing that last week. At about the 45-minute mark, we really allowed the questions to kind of take over, and it really kept us going. And even when we were wrapping up at 90 minutes, I still think we had 100 or so people here with some questions. Okay, let's get started. We're excited that so many of you were able to join us for this second in a three-part series. We have, looks like a little over creeping up to 400 people with us today, not only from the US, but around the world. Thank you. My co-host today is one of my colleagues here at Responsive, Teresa. Teresa, would you mind just introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Teresa Lee, and I'm based in Massachusetts, and I'm a senior consultant with Responsive Fundraising representing New England. I also have my own consultancy, and that followed a 25-year career in higher education in the greater Boston area.
Our guest today is Kathy Drucquer Duff. Kathy is an experienced fundraising leader. Kathy, would you mind introducing yourself?
Love to. Thanks, Jason. Good morning. I'm calling in from California. I'm based in San Diego. Spent most of my career in higher education with a 4-year detour in healthcare. And really my favorite part about this business is having conversations like this. So Jason and Teresa, thank you for the time. And it's really wonderful to see so many clients, past staff members, colleagues, and friends on the line. So I actually feel it's more of just kind of a discussion.
Yeah, I think this is going to be really fun, Kathy. Kathy, if there's anything that I believe about the road ahead that we can think about for those of us here today, it's the opportunity to begin thinking more critically and more intentionally about what it is that we're doing. I think we can all appreciate that it is often in the midst of a tragedy that we can begin to rethink who we are, why we do what we do, and what we're all about. Perhaps now is an ideal time to relinquish some of the baggage that's been holding us back as a profession. What's your thoughts about that?
Great question. Thank you. I think a good lead off for a place to start. You know, when I look at where we've been, even if we go back past 8 weeks, one of the things that we have increasingly seen, it has been much more difficult to get face-to-face meetings. So I think we've recognized that our business has been shifting. Some of us been more aggressive, I think, or assertive in that space. But where we are now is that we can't have face-to-face meetings. And so what does that mean for us going forward? What does that look like for a profession? Because I don't believe, you know, we first started California, we're now, I think we're ending week 6. And a lot of folks that I was talking to were saying that they were doing a great job in making outreach calls, which I applaud. I think the outreach calls are important, but we now really need to make that pivot and think about, what does call 2 look like? What does outreach number 2 look like? And as I've been having conversations with some of you on the line and others in the industry, is that I think there's a sadness. Whether you've been working for 2 weeks or 2 months, 2 years, 2 decades in this field, we were really, I think, classically taught, or we figured it out as we watched others do this, is that, a lot of our work was around connectivity. A lot of our work has been around going out and meeting with people where they are, whether that was in their office, their home, at our local coffee store, to have discussions with them. And what I'm hearing from a lot of the fundraisers that I work with is that not only do they know how to pivot, but they're sad. They are missing the opportunity to be out with their donors. And I think we have to recognize that moving forward, connectivity is going to have a very different definition. And what does that mean? What does it look like if I have a donor who is, a lot of our population is older, that says, Kathy, I don't want to meet with you face to face. I don't feel safe. You travel, you're on a plane, and you're now going to come into my home. That doesn't feel good. I don't want to come to campus where there are large groups of people anymore. So I think that one of the most important things is, let's take a step back and recognize, where are you in your career? And are you going to push yourself to grow? And are you going to push yourself to do our business differently? I firmly believe that we are now in a space that if you cannot move a donor from qualification all the way through a very important relationship, and Jim did a beautiful job last week talking about the importance of relationships, and that's still what we do. I heard someone this morning say, the heart and soul of our work has not changed. And it hasn't. The mission and the things that we truly believe in are going to continue. But I really encourage and for all of us to think about, how do we get into the discomfort zone of learning our business all over again? If I have to, and I still want that connectivity, to be able to move you from qualification to cultivation to solicitation, all on the phone, all on a Zoom call, all telephonically, what does that look like? And so I think your question, Jason, is important, because we are going to need, the road ahead is not the road that we have been on. We have been seeing for some time that our industry is changing. For those of us that can pivot, we're going to be able to do so. For those of us who can't, I think we're not only going to do a disservice to our organizations, but we're doing a disservice to those most important relationships, which is our donors.
So given the restrictions on meeting face-to-face, we get a lot of questions about, how would you advise fundraisers to engage people in new relationships? Existing relationships, we can figure that out for the most part, although it's still awkward. But what about developing new relationships? Because I've talked to people who have managers who are saying, I expect you to still find new prospects and start cultivating new prospects.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's probably one that I'm asked the most, because I think we sometimes get a story in our head that I can't call someone because they're going through this time. We're all going through this time. There is no one right now that is not having to think about things differently. In our house, we have 2 college students. They're both home. Neither are happy to be home. They're on their Zoom classes while my husband's on his call and I'm on a call. There's just a different dynamic. And so it would be very easy for me to say, well, I can't call any prospect that has teenagers. It would be just as easy to say the story in my head. I can't call anyone that has young children. I can't call anyone. We're going to have to move past that story in our head and recognize that there are people that care deeply. And some of the stories that I've seen from some of my clients and partners in the last 6 weeks have been so incredibly moving. And those aren't all donors that we know. Several of these people are folks that are brand new to our organizations. And so what I'm encouraging people to think about is, who is your community? Who could be in your community? What are you doing today that is still vitally important? And I don't want this to sound crass, and I don't want it to sound light, but all of our causes that we care so deeply about are just as important as we come out of this pandemic. And we can't say that that's the only area that we're going to fundraise. Now, I've been really proud to see healthcare systems and nonprofits and universities making some very important pivots. But we have to remember this is not about need. This is still about aspiration. So whether I'm qualifying someone brand new or I'm talking to someone that I have that relationship, how would you want to invite them into our community? So I think that we start that conversation the same way, whether it's someone that we know well or that we don't. Initially, we have to check in. How are you doing? And I think you have to be ready, though, to have the question. It has to go beyond how are you doing? I think we need to be able to ask people, what has been your pivot? What I was seeing before, 6 to 8 weeks ago, usually a phone call would start and someone is going to tell me how busy they are. I am so busy. I'm busy this, I'm busy that. That's not what I'm hearing. People are, a lot of the teams that I work with, I'm seeing that there is a greater connectivity. They know more about the people that they work with. People that the nonprofits or the organizations that I support, and I've heard now from all of them, I'm having conversations that are different because A, I have time. B, I think that people are being more sensitive. And if we believe that relationship trumps all, how are you building that relationship with that first call? Well, I think the most important is you have to feel you've earned the right to make that call. And I think that's something that we felt before this. So why would that change? Do I still truly believe in my mission that I whatever mission it is that I'm supporting as a representative for that organization? Do I believe that I can have a good dialogue about that? Can I ask good, meaningful questions? And then how do I move that relationship forward? Philanthropy is resilient. Philanthropy is aspirational. And I think those are two things that we really have to hang on to as we continue these dialogues. And so for those, that are on the line that may be newer or that have been hesitant about making calls, try it. But block time. Don't make a call. You need to block a couple of hours and get yourself in that groove and be able to think about what are the greatest pride points in my organization? And I want to know. And so I know one of the questions that I've been encouraging people to ask is, what has been your greatest pivot during this time? How has this time at home strengthened your connections? Talk about connections in their family or their friends or in the nonprofit or the organizations they care about. The answer, as they tell me what are the things that they are doing to strengthen, are going to help me connect dots and build that relationship.
I actually think this time has uncovered a lot and gotten us back to basics in a lot of ways. You're connecting not just with acquaintances, you have to make a special effort to relate to your friends if it's on Zoom or what have you. But I've seen more of my friends in a strange way via Zoom. And I think it's also uncovered getting back to basics with our nonprofits around mission. Yes. Because to make yourself relevant during these times, as you suggest, you have to pivot to what is our mission and how does it relate to how we're helping our constituents in this moment. For higher education, it's okay, we asked students to leave our campus in a very short period of time. A lot of support came along with that. We have students still living in the towns where they go to school and can't work and they need food. There are a lot of needs that will be ongoing. One of the questions that we have here is what happens in the fall if students don't come back to campus? How does that impact fundraising? For me, I think there's going to be a greater need for financial aid going forward because of the economic impact. But there's also, let's say it opens in the fall. I'm not 100% thinking that that's going to happen. I don't think that's a magic time for anybody. But there are going to be more people with general insecurity and certainly financial insecurity. But what's your take on that, Jason or Kathy?
Well, Jason, I can tell you were ready to jump in, so I'll let you jump, and then I'll build upon.
Yeah, I'm not ready to jump in yet. I'm sitting here simmering on one of the earlier thoughts that Kathy made. So, Kathy, you tackle that question before I jump in here.
I think we need to recognize that, I wish I had a crystal ball. I think we all wish that we had a crystal ball to be able to, because I think a lot of our donors and friends are asking, how is this pandemic going to impact our institutions? You know, Teresa, to your point, I think it's really important to recognize that the needs and the aspirational things that our donors were doing before this don't change. And whether this goes on for 6 weeks or 6 months, or God forbid, 6 years, we are going to be in a situation that we need to pivot. And so if we see ourselves, whether it's hospitals that are looking at how they use their beds differently, or it's universities that are looking at, are we going to have students? Are we not going to have students? Getting back to your point about what is our true mission and how are we connecting people to that? And so I think that, you know, Jim gave an example last week of a donor that he worked with named Darlene. I happened to have had the opportunity to work with that donor as well because we lived in the same community. And one of the things that I thought that was so important about what Jim said about Darlene is that, you know, he initially thought that maybe she didn't like him. And he said, maybe we need to build a different relationship. And what he learned, and I think many of us have Darlene's in our portfolios, is that she would test and she would test and she would ask different questions and she would push, but she was pushing to see, were we just a paid fundraiser that was going to sell something, or were we someone that could truly talk about the mission of the organization in a meaningful way? And when I think about the Darlenes in my portfolio, they're the ones that will pivot with us if they truly believe our leadership. And then I can, if I'm able to pivot Darlene, and let's say that she does something that will support students in the fall, that maybe that for students that can't come back, maybe that she supports something online, then I have the ability to role model Darlene's gift with others. Because we know that people still give to things that are successful. And during a time of the pandemic, when all of us are feeling scared in one way, shape, or form, to be able to, our organizations, to role model those success stories is critically important. And so I'd encourage those on the line. What are your success stories? Again, I had a client call this morning and I was thrilled to hear about a $10 million gift. That gift came in, it started from start to stop in the last 6 weeks. And this is someone who truly, they believed in the mission. And then they've now gotten a second gift, an in-kind gift. It's the healthcare organization that's going to be equally important for someone that they did not know at all. But they took the opportunity, that they heard about them, they made a call, and then they built that relationship. And so I think while we know our business is having to change when we think about the road ahead, there is values fundamentally that we can't walk away from those values, and we can't walk away. And I'm not trying to sound preachy. I really want this to, I hope it sounds more like it's coming from my heart, because I so believe in our mission and I so believe in the connectivity, but we're going to have to pick up the phone. We're going to have to meet people where they are. We're going to have to discover where they are. And then we still have to extend that invitation for them, if they're new, to learn more about us. And if they aren't new, to get really excited about what we're doing. And when I look, you know, and I know all of us on the line have great work that is going on. How are you going to talk about that in a meaningful way? So I don't know what the fall is going to look like, but I do know that if we think that we can wait to have conversations with donors, you can't. Some of you heard another call where I talked about, there was a quote I saw that talked about opportunities are like sunrise, but if you miss it, it's gone. And that's exactly where I think we are as an industry right now, that if we miss this ability to pivot, and doesn't mean you have to move away from your core values and the things that are important, but if you miss this opportunity, and I already have one client where I've seen this and it makes me sad, they're not going to be able to catch up at this point. They have not been able to pivot. They're not having conversations, and we need to do it. So Teresa, I kind of went a little bit longer.
So,
No. In fact, you're answering some questions that I'm seeing here, so that's good. And we're going to let Jason get on his soapbox now.
no soapboxes yet. Maybe an "I told you so," but not a soapbox, and not an "I told you so" to either of you. But it's that So those of us who have done the type of work that you're describing, Kathy, understand that test. And what most concerns me right now for the entire sector is that there's probably never been a bigger test. And because we've never been in that testing moment with a donor, our organizations are essentially going to fail. Because we've never developed that intuition that says the conversation I'm having with Kathy now is a test that precedes the gift that I'm gonna need to have. And they've never developed I was having a conversation with some folks on my podcast and in some sideline conversations about the notion of discernment. Essentially, there's on the other side of that test on our side. So if the donor is quote unquote testing us, there's a discernment that happens on our side that a lot of us have never learned. And that's what our team is oftentimes trying to talk to our clients about, is trying to make it less about predictability, less about making it mechanical, less about making it a science, and knowing how to be in that space where you can discern the fact that you're being tested. I remember working with a client coincidentally in Southern California where you happened to be, and I was interacting along with my client directly with the donor, and I knew this donor was testing us. I was essentially playing a sort of almost like a backup major gifts officer with my client. And I remember as the relationship matured, both between myself and the donor and my client, she started to give more generously of her time and of her, the communications and stuff. And later I found out that, all the signs that we were sort of in that testing mode became so evident. But it was only having essentially walked with my client through that testing phase of the relationship that my client, Cammie, would have ever sort of been able to discern that. And I just think my friend Kate, I got a friend Kate who's on here, and she's asking the question. She's been working for an organization. I've known Kate for a number of years, and she's asking the question, I'm working for an organization that doesn't have those relationships. Kate knows very well, I've been saying to Kate for quite some time, you've got to build those relationships. You've got to go through those tests, if you will. And quite honestly, I hurt. And I say this to you, Kate, with all sincerity, I hurt for you because I feel like those organizations are in the most difficult predicaments. But also, here's my soapbox on your earlier comment on the question that you posed to kind of start the conversation with, Teresa. It's this notion that, and I wrote it down because I wanted to, I think one of the things that we're going to have to confront, and I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on this. I think one of the things that we're going to have to confront in fundraising is, and we've never said it, I don't know who's ever said this, but it's the fact of the matter that it's easier to ask a stranger than it is to ask for a friend. That, to me, is the fundamental challenge that we're going to deal with right now. So think about the question you posed initially, Teresa, when you asked Kathy the question about new donors. No wonder these organizations want to approach new donors because, quite frankly, they've got friends, but they don't want to ask friends. And now is really the only time that we need to be asking friends. And right now is probably not the ideal time to be looking for new friends. But it is so much more comfortable to do things that don't require us to kind of push that envelope in that relationship. And we've been sitting in that sort of comfort zone before we hit the record button, before we got started. I knew you were going to sort of help take us there, Kathy, because there's the vulnerability and the messiness and the uncertainty and everything that comes with the work that I think for so long we've been able to avoid, that quite frankly, COVID-19 may sort of force some of us to have to just leap into, and it might just scare the shit out of a lot of us, right? Am I right?
Well, I think for me, it brings greater clarity. You can assess yourself so much better in the time of clearing away all of the noise and see where you're at. So if you haven't been doing a good job developing relationships, that will become crystal clear in this moment because you don't have anybody to call. And if you're not connected to your mission, you don't understand what your mission is, or you haven't pivoted from what your mission is to something relevant in this moment, that'll become crystal clear. So those are the people are asking questions about, okay, if we're getting together as a group, what should we be talking about? And I think those are getting back to basics, right? Who are we? How do we serve people? What's important? And I am a firm believer, because I've been hearing it from many, many colleagues, that people do want to help in this moment. So I think we can reach out to new people too, but certainly our friends, and just beyond the checking in, it's remind them what you're doing for the constituents you serve and ask them if that's at all interest to them to participate in that. If it is not, it may not have been 3 months ago either, by the way. And if it is now, great. Let me tell you how you can be helpful. That's our job.
Yeah, you're hitting on such important points. And, I think some things that haven't changed, to Jason's point, if you haven't had those relationships, how are you going to get them? We're still one donor, one relationship at a time. No matter how we do this, there is no silver bullet where you buy a list or you run out and because you think someone cares about something. But to your point, many of the conversations that I've had and I'm seeing with my clients is we ask them how they are and what's going on. Again, I think we need to move now away from that question and have other ones in our arsenal. But they are then saying, what's happening in your organization? Or how are people there handling this? Or what can I do? And we have to be prepared to be conversational about that. And so no matter where you are in your learning curve, and I love, Jason, that you used the word vulnerability, because there is a rawness right now and that vulnerability, and you're going to have to take a leap of faith. And a lot of times we'll talk about the discomfort zone, that sometimes donors will ask us questions and we don't know what those answers are going to be. That's okay. Tell them you don't know it, but if there's ever been a time to push yourself into the discomfort zone and learn more, it is now. It is absolutely now, because we do have more time to participate in webinars like today, to be reading blogs, to be hearing success stories, to be talking to our colleagues, whether that's a colleague. Some of you on the line I'm seeing are from very large shops. And I know some of you are a one-man band or one-woman band. But you can still reach out to others in your community and ask how they're approaching and what they're doing, because you have to be conversational. A donor can pick out when you are being disingenuous. A donor can hear. Think of all the things if you got a call from one of us and what would be moving to you to continue that conversation, or where you would feel like you're getting a pitch. So you need to be really comfortable. You need to be really conversational. And if you're not there, pick up the phone, do it with your CEO, do it with another staff person, and really kind of throw at each other, what are the questions that you think someone might ask about our organization today, and have some fun. This still is while our work is incredibly meaningful and it is some days really tough, it can be really fun. And I think that sometimes getting in that discomfort zone, we don't want to leave you there too long, but I would encourage you, Ryan, try some new things, especially with donors that have prospects that don't know us at all. And then kind of watch those themes. What are the things that we're learning that can help build those relationships? Because I think, Jason, the one thing that I like to do is do a point counterpoint. I actually think there is no better time than right now to reach out to people that don't know our organizations. I think this is a wonderful time to be able to really listen and ask people this is where we are. Is there something that we could do to strengthen and build a relationship? I would love to have a conversation about the work that we're doing. And, to either be able to say that maybe we haven't been as present in our community as we want to be, and we are taking this time now to do that, especially for those that have grateful patients or that have alumni or parents that we have not spent as much time with. This is a beautiful time to say that our leadership has said, now is the time to focus on our community. And that is the reason. So when they say, why are you calling me? I've never heard from you. This is odd. To be able to say, we are committed to our community, wherever whether that's a global community or anything else, build that into our speaking points, because to me, that's natural.
But are we hiding behind the question? Are we hiding behind the question of who to call? And by continuously asking ourselves the question, who do we call? Because I don't think you and I really give a damn whether they call a current donor or a new donor. What you and I are basically saying is pick up the damn phone. Isn't right? And too few of us in our space have never learned how. And quite frankly, the majority of the people on the call probably have enormous number of donors that are no different in terms of being known versus those who are not known. So I think the messy predicament that we're in is that we have never developed those muscles that allow us to pick up the phone. And I feel like in some ways And I got to say this to the rest of my team, because I've got my team on here too. I think in some ways, like this notion of webinars actually becomes part of the problem as well. So we hide behind questions. Well, we also hide behind professional development. We hide behind webinars. I think for quite some time, we've been hiding behind ethical questions. I think we're doing a lot of things that prevent us from actually learning how to navigate the discernment of building a relationship with whoever that person happens to be. And I'd love for you to speak to this. I'd love for both of you to speak to this. Teresa, you and I know that we talk about this in my seminar, but I'd love to hear the both of you speaking to this, because here it is, a big burly white guy talking about this. But 80+% of the people that are probably on this call right now are women. And the large majority of the people in our line of work are women. We know that. That's just a fact. And it seems to me that women are actually the better prepared, better designed type individuals to do this type of work. And people who've listened to my podcast routinely hear me saying that the type of work we're encouraging people to do are the skills that we oftentimes learn from our mother, not from our father. And so I just wonder if the women on this call, which I'm guessing is 80% of the people listening today, need to realize that maybe women need to take back fundraising and stop letting it be so male dominated, so male characteristic of the way that a guy like me might try to design it to be.
Kathy, you take that first. I'm not touching it.
Come on, you can touch that.
I will.
You've both been, you've both been working in a male-dominated world for so long.
Male management dominated, but not male dominated.
Yes, right. That's what I mean.
And I don't think there's a difference between males and females in terms of doing this work. I think what you're keying into is skills and abilities and sensibilities, your own characteristics that make you sensitive to how to build relationships and be perceptive and all of those things, and be vulnerable. Doesn't always come the same for men and women. I get it, but there are many women we're not one monolith thing. There are many women who aren't able to be vulnerable either, and a lot of men who are better at being vulnerable. So I think it's really the skills and characteristics. But yes, there are a lot of men in management where there should be women. I will agree with that point.
Okay, you're gonna at least give us that. Okay.
I will. Yeah. Go ahead, Kathy. To you.
Jason, you covered a lot in that, and I want to pick a few things out, because I absolutely agree. I think professional development is something that is so important. I'm going to start with the webinar and then kind of build from there.
Yeah.
You get good in this business through practice. And I often will say, let's say that you have a phone call with someone and it's a first time call, the way that you can learn best from that call is when you hang up is to reflect what went well in that conversation and what would I change? Because now I just went from having one call to two. And if I did my word scripting, and I'm a big believer of talking points. So if I did talking points and then I had the call and then I do the reflection, now I get to have that meeting 3 times. So I absolutely agree that we cannot let professional development take the place of experience. The only way someone gets good in this business is doing it. And that is out the door, or now it's going to be on the phone. And so I agree with your comment about picking up the phone. There was an interesting stat that came out a couple of weeks ago, and I wish I had printed the report or kept it, because it was looking at the first 4 weeks of the pandemic and what was happening in fundraising. Email was the least best way to reach out. So I think that a lot of us have a tendency to hide behind email.
Amen.
I have received have been so ridiculously tone deaf. I got an email from an organization that I have supported over the years, and the headline really would make me think that they had found a cure for COVID, which is absolutely not true. And then they went in to ask me for a Doctor's Day gift. I was so insulted by this communication because I thought it was so tone deaf. And the difference it would have made if someone would have called and had a conversation with me, they would have gotten a gift, because the work that this organization is doing is vital for the community, but it got lost in a completely tone deaf. So I would encourage those on the line to think about, even if you've built a relationship on email, I think email right now has an opportunity to fall really flat. We're seeing open rates higher, which is great. And we're seeing organization's gift rates up higher, but what are you going to do to keep that relationship? And so at that point, you've got to get on the phone, and then you need to ask people, how do they want to hear from us? Will they do a Zoom call? Will they do FaceTime? Can you, if someone says, Kathy, I'm scared of that Zoom thing. It makes me uncomfortable. I've heard things about privacy. Okay, well, I can set up a call that has a password. I can help alleviate that. I would love to teach you how to use Zoom. Again, that's building a relationship. It is showing that partnership that is so important in fundraising. So I want to just, because when you said the phone, I think it's really important. But then I think we need to take the time. In a new scenario, how would people best want to hear from our organizations? And if someone says email, that's great. And we need to capture it in our databases because we're going to continue to look. But it's back to the point, I think that if you can't pick up the phone, call your parents, call your friends, get comfortable.
Just learn, right?
And then make those calls.
Yeah.
I think that, so I've always been a big believer that one of the things I at least love about this industry is I get to be who I am. So I am more of a subjective fundraiser, but you can always grow your style. So to your point about men versus women, I'm going to say, figure out what your style is, but then grow it, because every donor that I meet with is not me. Okay. I'm very subjective. I am a little more touchy-feely. I like having that connectivity and that check-in. When I have a donor who's very factual and they need more stats, I have to switch my style, or I've got to see if one of my partners in my office are they a better match for them? And so I really encourage us to look at what is it in Jason's style that I like? What is it in Teresa's style that I like? What is it about Teresa's style that maybe I can't do? And now I need to push myself again into that discomfort zone. This is another way where is when we can talk with each other about what's working currently in the pandemic for them as a gift officer or as a donor relations officer, a prospect manager, wherever you are in the cycle. How do you take what we're hearing from each other and how do we learn from the trends of our organization? And again, if you're a one-person shop, follow the trends that are going on in your city or your town or your area. Or if you work for the Humane Society, reach out to someone at the Humane Society in another city and ask what their trends are. There's ways to pick those up that will help us grow. So,
well, I'm going to pivot off of that point because this is a trend. Someone asked, how do you move the conversation forward with a donor when they respond to, how are you doing, by saying, how do you think I'm doing? Have you seen the stock market lately?
So we're going to hear that. And we heard it a lot in 2008 and 2009. I think the difference here is if you read the paper, it's going to take a lot longer. But to be able, this is where to meet them where they are. And what I mean by that is if maybe this is someone that you're 3/4 of the way through. All right. So we've qualified you. We've had great conversations. I really understand what it is you care about. And we've been talking about a gift and they give that response. What I might want to say is to be able to ask them, you need to make a transition, have a pivot in that conversation, but to be able to say, based on the conversations that we were having, what was most meaningful about that? Or if I've given them a proposal, to ask them on the proposal that we've shared with you, what did you gravitate towards? Because what I'm then probably going to do is ask them, would they be in a position to make a seed gift? Would they be in a position to make an annual gift? Would they, because we saw in 2008, a lot of folks, when we acknowledged the fact that their finances had changed, they chose to support us wherever they were in that cycle. Some people actually, I had donors that said to me, Kathy, I know that a lot of your donors are falling off because they're not in position to make a gift. So-and-so and I are actually going to double our gift because we believe in the organization and we're worried that you're going to lose that really important support. With others that we talk to, they would say that, are you kidding? Have you seen what's going on with the market? Yes, we have. And we know that a lot of our donors and those who support us have taken a great hit. And we're having conversations with what they would like their relationship with us to look like moving forward. And so in some cases it was, I'm not going to be able to do anything this year or next year. Then it's, well, how can we stay in touch with you? Because your relationship with us is very important. I don't ever want anyone that I'm working with to think that it is about the gift. because it shouldn't be. We are representatives of our institution, and if we do our job well, someone is going to choose to support that institution with their philanthropy for the rest of their lives. I don't want a one-off gift. I want it. I really sincerely mean that. I really want to.
But Kathy, that's the boldness that I think people like yourself and my team, we've got to be out there saying that, because in reality, some of the questions that are being raised are about nothing but the gift. And I think we're sort of, I think COVID-19 may actually, the silver lining in this may be that we can get on the other side of this and we can stop playing around with the idea that fundraising is about relationships, and some of us can actually make it about relationships, because I think we're even hiding behind the cliches. You know, it's one thing to say that, but if you can't actually, I mean, here's the thing: I can talk to you for 10 minutes about your work, and you'll reference the first names of donors in a matter of 10 minutes. And I know you know how to do the job. And I could have the same conversation with 50 other fundraisers, and there'll be signals within 10 minutes that'll tell me whether this person actually knows how to get the job done or not. And my concern is that not enough of us even know how to demonstrate those signals. They're just not having the conversations, and they're hiding behind so many different things. Somebody's asking the question, for example, sponsorships. I know that sponsorships are part of what I would typically call sort of lane one, sort of arm's length sort of initiatives. But at some point, we've got to stop hiding behind sponsorships and other sort of frameworks, and recognize that there's another person on the other, there's a human being on the other side of that quote unquote sponsorship. And we've professionalized sort of this this mechanism that assumes that's how the money is raised. I'm sorry, buddy, you're not raising money via sponsorships any differently than you're raising money anywhere else. You're raising money because you picked up the phone, you had a conversation with a human being, you had the audacity to say, would you contribute to our cause? And you called it a sponsorship. So therefore you think that because you call it a sponsorship, we can turn that into some sort of science. It's not a science. It's just picking up the phone. I mean, Kathy, how are we going to fix this? What are we going to do?
I think for many of us, we've recognized for a long time, there are transactional shops, and there are relationship-based shops, and then there are donor-centric shops. And I encourage all of you, especially if you happen to be looking for a position, you want to be in the shop that is about the donor experience. It is about the donor relationship. That is so critical. And I think sometimes we get lost in that because we think, and a lot of times I've worked for a chancellor that was this way, literally believed that you were only as good as your last gift. You cannot be successful in that type of environment. So sometimes it's how are we educating those that we work with about the work that we do. But I also think that because there is a whole grouping of us that over-cultivate and build these wonderful friendships, but don't ever get to the conversation about my role is philanthropy. The reason, and when you look at, again, the folks that we have on the phone, whether you're a big shop or a small shop, the only reason our role exists is to build a relationship that leads to philanthropic dollars. That is it. That is it. And I know people get frustrated sometimes when I say that. And it's crushing me right now to see certain organizations are talking about furloughing of fundraisers. They're talking about laying off fundraisers. And usually that, in my mind, we have not done a good enough job in demonstrating that partnership. We are one of the only ways right now that organizations are going to get dollars in, but we need to do it in a way that it's not a fear factor. It's not an emergency. We have to be looking at what is, and I know I'm sounding really soapboxy, so Jason, here I go.
But Kathy, what you're saying is, if we over cultivate or over donor love or over donor center or over donor anything, but we never actually get to the point where we confidently can ask for a check, we've never actually given our employer the case for which we belong on the payroll. You know, I mean, you can be a customer relationship person all day long, but your job is ultimately to cultivate a relationship that does lead to the place where you can help open a door to a meaningful exchange of resources. And so many of us have never gotten there. I get accused periodically of being the guy who works people out of a job. But I think that maybe some of the sort of the benefit of this is some of us are going to realize, and I suspect there's a number of us on this call today that realize that the job description that you and I are talking about is not the job description some people actually even want. They don't want to ask people for money. And so they hide behind webinars, and they hide behind the big ideas, and they hide behind the ethics and everything else. And they get pissed off when guys like me say bold things, and they'll let other people flutter them and stuff. But at the end of the day, they're not doing what you're talking about them doing.
Well, and I don't want to, we're really looking at the road ahead, but it's easy for me to look backwards a little bit. And, a lot of times I do informational interviews every week. People are calling, they want to get in the industry. And a lot of people say, I love people. That's fabulous. Okay. That's fabulous. But you're not going to be a good fundraiser because you like people.
Yeah.
A good fundraiser because you represent your institution well. You care deeply and passionately about the mission, and you can talk about it in ways that make sense. You invite people in to invest, but you have to be able to talk about philanthropy in the first meeting. So getting back to one of the first questions that Teresa asked, you cannot say, I'm calling on behalf of the chancellor to see how you are because we're trying to build community, and never talk about your role. You can't call from a hospital and say, I want to know about your patient experience, and not talk about your role. We should be so proud of what philanthropy does. When we look at our organizations and we see how philanthropy has changed it before we ever got there, we have to be able to be really confident that philanthropy is game changing in a really special and meaningful way. And if you are not comfortable talking about money, you're not going to get through this pandemic.
Right.
You are not comfortable talking about how when someone makes an investment in an organization and what that aspirational is going to do, you're not going to last. And it kills me because I know we're going to see a lot of fundraisers out of work. Some that should not be because organizations are going to make short-sighted decisions, but others that just weren't able to demonstrate the value to their organization. And the value is that I was a Girl Scout, and I'm still a deep and loyal Girl Scout. You have to leave camp better than you found it. It is not about, can I put $1 million gift on my resume, and this is an organization that I believe will allow me to do it. It has to be that I believe in the impact of what that gift will do, and I'm going to talk about it in a very meaningful way.
Yeah. I think I was thinking about, I don't think it's any, so you started the conversation. So this is a copy of Just Mercy. Just Mercy was written by Brian Stevenson, and Stevenson actually was the keynote speaker at AFP in New Orleans 2 years ago. And what Stevenson talks about, it's the first time I'm going on record sort of making this observation about AFP. So Stevenson is basically making the argument that we in the nonprofit sector, or we as a general society, need to increase the proximity that we have to the people that we aim to serve. So the marginalized people, the people that live, all of the people that we would want to serve in the nonprofit sector, he's saying we need to increase the proximity. We need to move closer to them. And what I felt like when I listened to him speak, and him and I both went to the same university, and so I've been paying attention to Stevenson for quite some time. What I felt like may have missed, sort of went over the heads of a lot of people at that conference, was that the same proximity that Stevenson would want us to increase as it applies to the marginalized people in society is the same proximity that we need to learn as fundraisers how to increase between us and our donors. And this loops us back kind of to that place where you started with, Kathy, and it sort of opens that sort of possibly offers a new direction for the conversation. I think the road ahead is going to be a place where proximity to our donors can be done actually in more efficient ways. Just like you're a donor with me here, as if you're a donor or I'm your donor, we could be having a very meaningful conversation just like this. I don't have to hop on a plane and fly to the West Coast to have this conversation. You and I are enjoying this conversation. And if you were, I think proximity is going to be both that opportunity, but both the challenge it's going to come on the other side of picking up the telephone. But I think it's going to be quite fascinating what that's going to look like. Because everything that everything that we've been doing, for example, as a team, so our consulting team, Teresa, you and I, and Anne, she's on here with us as well. So we have all together only been in the room physically probably once in the history of our small shop. But I think the proximity that we feel as a team is extraordinary in the last, say, 6 weeks.
We spend a lot of time together talking.
Yeah.
And
Proximity.
getting to know each other on a lot of levels. Yeah.
Proximity. So when somebody says to me, what's the road ahead going to look like? Or what is the future of fundraising? I think the proximity is going to increase, but it's going to increase because these type of platforms are going to enable us to do this. Children are learning on these things like crazy. I mean, just think of the number of different sort of exchanges, human interactions, and maybe it's the confidence that we as fundraisers need to have, just like every other institution in the world has decided, hey, we'll just meet on Zoom. I have never done a meeting. I said that to a client last week. I said, I've never done a meeting on Zoom with a major donor, but find 25 of them and I'll join with you and see how it works.
So we have a question about metrics, and I think this dovetails nice into what you were talking about. It says, I work for a large organization which has sophisticated metrics for development officers. With the sea change in our environment, administrators are rushing to adapt the metrics instead of putting a pause on metrics for this year. There has been no input from the development team. It's very data-driven during a time when I'm focusing on quality discovery, cultivation, and engagement. How would you address metrics during this time?
Yeah, that's good.
Great question. And so those
Anonymous,
of you know,
I can't attribute it to someone, but
was an early adopter back in 2001. So been using metrics for a long time. And I'm going to partner this with what Jason was just saying about proximity. I'm going to use the word connectivity, but whether we say proximity, connectivity,
sure.
It is so important that we're building those really, really strong connections. And that's what, for many of us, that's what brought us into this industry, was that ability to be able to connect. And so as we pivot and we think about that connectivity, I hope that every shop on the phone has added a metric of virtual and what does virtual do, and be able to look at what is a virtual meeting, because I know a lot of organizations said, oh, you can't have a meaningful thing over a phone. You can't do something meaningful over email. I'm sorry, if you're a good fundraiser, you give me any forum, any platform, and we are going to do our work. And so I think that it is critical that shops add that virtual piece. And then not only are we looking at those touch points and we're tracking them, but I want to now, the same way we used to track our face-to-face meetings, and is it this many months that we go from step to step? We need to be, I think we're going to move people through the donor cycle faster because of the virtual connections. I think that the good work that we are able to do over the phone, to your point, Jason, once if I qualify you and we make that match in the second call, and the third call, we're really then talking about what is that, what is this gift? What could it look like? When I say, let's say it's September and we've been all released, and I say I want to come see someone, they're going to say, why? I just trained that donor, and we do train our donors.
Yes, we do.
Levels, we train them about behaviors, and so we are going to end up training anyone that we've qualified. I don't need to get on a plane to come see them. I don't need to come to see your campus, which means that I need, once we can walk back on campus. In fact, I saw there's someone on the line actually today that they sent me their campus's video, and I was so impressed because it had all the scene shots, the beautiful, campanile and the chimes and all the things that we think of, with this advancement leader talking about this time in a very genuine, real way. I don't need to fly to go see that campus. I saw it all in a beautiful 60-second video. It got me, my emotions stirring. It made me feel great. So we can, again, I can take my phone, and some people know me, I'm a big believer. You take your phone, you go film a 30-second thing, and you send it off to a donor. So that connectivity is going to be important. So getting back to your question, Teresa, I kind of went off a little bit. is I think we need to have some conversations about and give examples. If I can walk into my manager's office and show 5 relationships that I have moved in a significant way that will lead to a gift, and I think that my metrics should reflect that, that's where people are going to see it. A lot of times when we look at metrics, it's tied purely to that financial goal. And the metric I'm a huge believer that the reason that you have metrics is it gives us permission to focus on the things that are most important. And so if my metric is face-to-face meetings, because historically that was where we did our best work and that was how we closed gifts. But now if we're going to move that platform virtually, our metrics should show that. But I would encourage anyone that is feeling that those metrics are being driven top down. I want to come back and have a conversation about where my success is, how I'm moving relationships forward, where we're able to close the gifts, and could we have a conversation about metrics? I became a big believer. In fact, the person who really believed this is on the phone today. But we added a collaboration metric because it was something that we didn't have. But the fundraisers came forward and said, Kathy, we need to do a better job collaborating between our different schools. How can we be recognized for that? And we had a conversation about, okay, how did we come up with a metric? Because they were right.
Yeah.
I think we need to manage up, down, and across on this topic.
Well, metrics need to reflect the behavior that leads to the gift, right?
Yeah.
So it's the process that you should be tracking as well as the outcome.
Yeah.
And I think people only track the outcome in many cases, like how many visits, how many dollars. I've been guilty of that until I was enlightened. And there are many other steps along the way that we can track that we know leads toward the ultimate metric of the outcome of the gift that we don't. And one of them is collaboration. And we speak about, oh, we need to be more collaborative. And yet we don't reward fundraisers for being more collaborative. We don't say, you were more collaborative than you were last year. How do I know that? Because you demonstrated that to me, because we track that.
I haven't talked about this in a while, but I did when I was working on my previous book. I did talk about this a lot, and for about the year after the book came out, it was an invitation I received a lot to talk about. But it's the difference. It's the difference between metrics being based on performance and metrics that are based on mastery. And I think when we talk about a fundraising professional who wants to be really good and really valuable to their employer, they have to start being encouraged or encourage themselves with mastery-based metrics rather than this performance-based stuff. And I think we all are guilty, or we're all at least familiar with, if not guilty, of seeing some of the competitiveness that sort of plays out between institutions on social medias about the way that the money is raised. The size of a gift, in my mind, is less important as the way in which that gift was solicited. And so I would like to more often hear a supervisor asking about the process with which the development officer went through in order to secure the gift than to necessarily hear that this gift was of some extraordinary size. And I also want to point out that the most mature relationship, and this gets back to some of the earlier conversations that we were having between whether we pursue a new donor versus an existing donor. The existing donor for whom we've cultivated a meaningful relationship with and then go and secure a 7-figure gift from is oftentimes not as much mastery work going on as the less engaged donor and moving them to, say, a 5 or 6-figure gift. Asking for the first $25,000 donor, asking a donor for the first $25,000 check takes a lot of nerve for a development officer who A, isn't very experienced in asking for that gift, and B, for the donor who's never done that before. And that, Kathy, even gets to the point of training up your donors. I historically did a lot of my work in the faith-based space, and they use the word discipleship. Essentially, we're moving donors through a disciplingship process, building up their confidence level. You're not going to move a donor from $100 to $1 million. You're going to have to move them through a series of gifts. And that, to me, is a mastery metric and less just how much did you raise and how much did you raise in comparison to somebody else in the building, or somebody or the institution down the road. The other thing about mastery metrics that I think a lot of us when we think about our own professional careers, they have studied, and I'll be happy, anybody who wants to follow up with me, I'll be happy to point you in the direction of this stuff. This is not my stuff. But when you focus on mastery, which is to say, I want to be really good at something, you're not likely to run down the path of burnout. But it's the path of performance where you're always comparing yourself to the institution down the street or comparing yourself to the colleague down the hall that ultimately leads to burnout, which is obviously one of the things that we were certainly talking a whole lot about before all this came about. And so I think we have to learn, like, musicians are known for this, golfers are typically known for this. There's certain domains that are particularly known to be mastery focused individuals, as opposed to very competitive performance based metrics. It's like the kid on the soccer field. We got a soccer field in our backyard. Performance-based metrics is like the kid on the soccer field who really doesn't want to play soccer, but his mom's screaming at him on the sideline, telling him, you got to play better, versus the kid on the soccer field who actually wants to be out there and is actually enjoying what he or she is doing.
So here's a good one. Hang on, I missed. Okay. Do you think
Gosh, Kathy, you and I could really wear each other out. We're only an hour.
This is for Kathy. This is for Kathy. Do you think that there's a trend in organizations to move toward transactional instead of relationship building that leads to a gift? An impatience that pushes us there. Seems to be almost a panic to close, and that puts us in the position that you described of people knowing we are in there with the sales pitch. Seems to me there is a focus on metrics that don't really lead to gifts. Is that amplified now? Kind of dovetailing a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that could be an unfortunate reality. And I would encourage all of us on the phone that part of our role is to educate about the importance of philanthropy. And we cannot, I'm just going to say this, and I don't think we can tolerate transaction. It's not good for our business. It's not good for the organizations. It's certainly not good for our donors. And I get it. I understand, especially for some small nonprofits. I even look across the university landscape, the hospital landscape. I recognize there are some huge financial hits that are coming where philanthropy can be an enhancer, but we're not going to be the solution. And if we are the solution in a raw way, it's going to be one-time gifts. And to Jason's point, we don't want a donor that's going to come in and make a one-time gift and go off.
Right.
We want the donors who are truly going to be engaged in our work, because all of us on whatever organization you have, as the organization evolves, if our donors evolve with us, they can change. A lot of times people say in higher education that we go from cradle to grave. And again, another crass statement, but there's nothing that we do on a university campus that our donors don't care about. And so sometimes it's just making that match and asking the right question. I've heard people say, oh, well, they're interested in the Humane Society. That's fantastic. I want you to be engaged with the Humane Society. But what is it about the Humane Society? Because we're doing research, or we're doing this, or we're doing that will support that work. And so my fear is for those who allow us to become transactional, you're eroding this business. You're eroding philanthropy. You're eroding what philanthropy is supposed to do for the short term. And I just don't see, and I know there's success stories, and I worked for a manager who was completely transactional. But when I look at the longevity of how many donors didn't stay with that organization and they went somewhere else, because donors care about the connectivity, they care about impact, they want to truly make a difference. A lot of times in transactional, it is so much about the need, and then that then goes back to the concept of fear, that you'll have someone that maybe will make that gift once, but that's, to me, and I'm just going to say, to me, that's charity. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between charity work and philanthropic work, and I think you need to decide which camp you're going to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's plugging the hole or building the bridge, right? You can plug the hole. That's not as interesting.
Yeah, and we should be bridge building.
Yeah. So we've had two questions about people who've recently joined their organizations. We're talking weeks or maybe a month before all of this hit. What's your advice to them, Kathy?
Yeah, well, first of all, welcome. If you're brand new to the industry, welcome. If you're new to an organization, you know, my belief in onboarding new staff, it is critical for you to really get the opportunity to learn the organization, to learn the voice of the organization and what the organization represents. So in my onboarding, I usually don't want to have a gift officer even calling anyone in the first month. It's about learning who we are, whether that's watching your leader on videos, whether it's shadowing them, whatever. In month 2, I love to see you doing shadows. And right now I've had some questions about, how does shadowing work when everything is virtual? I think we want to have that same conversation. And I love when, shadow someone else in the organization. And for most of us, whether that's shadowing our CFO, our CEO, if it's a social worker, if it's another gift officer, there's plenty of opportunities to be able to shadow. Ask if you can still do that telephonically, because I think that you do want to get comfortable in understanding how we talk about our organization. I need to be able to represent who those thought leaders are. I can't represent them if I haven't seen them, if I haven't heard them speak. And so sometimes it may be, can I read their communications? Can I read some correspondence? How am I going to understand that voice? And so I think it's really important to dig deep, but then don't use your newness as an excuse to not get on the phone. For a long time, we've said that when we're newer, it gives us that ability to call supporters and understand and learn why do they support our organization when they have so many options of where they could give. How did they choose to make our organization number 1, number 2, number 3? To be able to ask where we fall into that. And so to do some of that, the work that Jim talked about last week and the discovery work is a beautiful opportunity, and then to build upon that. Jason, I'd love to hear how you would add or enhance that question.
I just think that part of what you and I are sort of stirring up in this conversation is going to and I think about some of the questions that are still sort of lingering in there. Reading in between the lines, I think some fundraisers are going to find that if they desire the type of work that you and that we're all describing, they're probably going to have to change jobs. They're going to have to work for another organization. And I think part of what maybe some of the listeners might want to hear is your thoughts and that's sort of the message I'm sending, is that now may be an okay time to think about working for an organization that wants to help you truly deliver on the type of work that we're describing. Because staying in a system, staying in the midst of here's the thing, staying inside an organization right now that is already a broken process and thinking that 6 months from now you're going to be able to fix it when all things get better is not likely to happen. They'd almost be better jumping ship now and start looking for the organization that's going to set them up for success. Because these are ingrained patterns and habits. These are deep values, things that, run contrary to anything that runs contrary to what we're suggesting is probably not the type of organization that is going to, it's not the organization. In my time, and I suspect all of us could say this, I know how to discern the type of organization that's going to set me up for success. And I think fundraisers need to get better at that.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the main reasons I became a consultant was I feel so strongly about retention of staff and keeping good and really valuing the staff that we have. But part of that is also recognizing that there are different ways to fundraise and that you want to align your own value system with the organization you work with. And with some of the leaders that I coach, the recent conversations have been, we need to pay more attention to retention than perhaps we ever have, because as people are having the opportunity to sit at home and they're working remotely, they're learning more about their organizations, they're learning more about the leadership, and is this an organization that I want to continue to work for? Right. Or they're at home and they're thinking, you know what, I was working 80 hours a week, and I wasn't being allowed to really build true relationships for the institution that is going to move philanthropy forward. And so I know I've had calls with some of my search firm partners that that are recognizing that there's going to be a lot of people that come out of this. They've had time to self-reflect. Again, our work is good. I always encourage people, if you think about, you can't become best practice in your business, and there's a lot of data out there that supports that. You have to be in your role 3-4 years to really see that return.
Yeah.
And so when folks are new or coming into the industry, I really encourage, don't jump around. Get some really good fundamentals, but that means you got to find the organization that will support that. But I also think this is a time where we're pivoting our business. Look for an organization that's going to make investments in you to pivot. And if you're with an organization that clearly is not going to move, and they're only looking for you are as good as your last gift, I think there's plenty of organizations out there right now that are pivoting. They're having meaningful conversations about how do we get more comfortable in this virtual world. They are doing role model calls. They're doing role playing calls. They're doing shadowing. They're making investments, and again, beyond a webinar. And I do think webinars are important, but they're a tool. You're not going to be a good fundraiser because I read a book or I did these other things. And so what are the organizations? I have watched fundraising change more in the last 6 weeks than the 26 years I've been in this industry. And the shift is not done. So what is the organizations that can help that?
So Melissa, one of the last questions that came through here, which is kind of along the line of what we're talking about, and I think it's very insightful because she sounds like she's been around a little while. She says, when I started in PR and development back in the late 80s, the focus was on the amount of transactions. The number was always the goal. Why do you think the field has changed more to relationship building? I'm glad that it has, but curious what has made the change. And my answer to that question, Melissa, is simply that I think fundraising is growing up. And I think, and you referenced PR, Melissa, in your question, I think when fundraising sort of came about, just like the maturing of any professional domain, it sort of hinges on the existing professional domains. And so fundraising in the late 1980s was still very hinged on what we might call its parents' domain, the parents, if you will, PR, marketing, and so forth. Whereas now, I think you have a professional domain that is figuring out that there are things that we can carry with us from those domains. There are other domains that offer us some things. And I think we're now figuring out what makes fundraising particularly unique. If you understand sort of the theories in PR and marketing, one of the things you also understand is that the job of the PR, the public relations professional and the marketing professional is oftentimes to make sales irrelevant. And a lot of what we're talking about is makes the sales characteristic of what we're talking about doing a more valid type of role. And so I think fundraising is sort of growing up and maturing, coming into its own. I think you're going to see less and less practitioners. I think you're going to see fewer experts, fewer consultants who come from those professional domains. And I think you're going to find more and more people who are going to be writing and speaking and authoring and those sorts of things, ideas that originate from fundraising, as opposed to having loyalties, if you will, from other places. What's your thoughts on that, Kathy?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because a lot of times when we talk about donor relations and donor stewardship, we look at what retail has done. You look at airlines and you look at hotels and all these places that have built loyalty clubs. They took a page from us. They saw that we were building these relationships and they were important. And so I think we'll continue to see that. We also, when we think about a gift versus a donor, the gift transactional, and you think about a donor experience. If I build a relationship, for those of you who are universities on the phone and we do a good job and that first gift is secured as someone is a student, they're involved in student philanthropy, they could be a donor to our organization for 50, 60, 70, 80 years versus a transaction where I'm going out to sell something, then that's what it is. And there isn't that relationship. And so I think a lot of the reasons too that we put such an emphasis bringing presidents out and bringing our chancellors out is because when they build the relationships, a lot of people are choosing to give towards the leadership. They believe in that leadership. And so, the other piece is to recognize that the relationship should not only be with the fundraiser. The relationship needs to be anchored to the institution. And so I'm always saying that, make sure you have at least 3 connections on your campus or your hospital or your nonprofit so that when the fundraiser leaves or the dean leaves or your CEO of your nonprofit leaves, that it's going to be sustainable. Fundraising needs to be sustainable, and we do that through relationships. Fundraising is not sustainable through transactions.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody, I don't know that they're anonymous. What advice do you have for fundraisers who have children at home who may feel stretched more? So this is a very practical question, but I totally appreciate it. As the husband of a wife with 4 homeschooling children, this woman says, or I'm not assuming it's a woman, but what advice do you have for fundraisers who have children at home who may feel stretched more than usual due to work, childcare, homeschooling to remain sustainable during this time?
Yeah.
Good question.
I really hope that you work for a good manager. And I work for all of us. I don't care who you are and what you are. All of us have had to make some changes. I mean, there's days where I'm really questioning my sanity. Sometimes that's based on me and my Zoom calls. Some days it's based on things that are going on in the house. And so I think we need to have conversations. And even as, one of my biggest fears is we're hearing about, certain states are reopening, schools are not opening. So these kids are home until August or September. And I think we really need to have discussions about how we're going to support our workforce as some of this transitions. And so a lot of times I'm accused of being a little Pollyanna and that not every manager is willing to have this discussion. But I think you need to be honest. And so what I've suggested is either look at the times, if I tend to be an early morning person, so I'm getting all of my emails when my kids were younger out before they got up. And then I may have a conversation with my manager that I'm not going to be present from 10 to 2 because that's really the time that I'm seeing my kids are struggling. They need more help with classwork, but I'll be back. And I'm then going to work from 5 to 8. I mean, I think we're going to need to pivot, but you also need self-care. What is so important for all of us is what is your self-care? Whether that's reading, whether that's walking, whether it's being in your garden, whether that's locking yourself away from your children for an hour and hope if you've got someone else who can be there to help is really important. I had someone say, I feel guilty because I'm putting my child in front of a TV more. Well, you can still make that educational. You can, so there's a lot of things that we can do. And so I'm going to say, you got to be honest about where you are. And you're going to have to meet yourself there. But I hope that our stronger managers are having discussions around this. And if not, maybe you have a call with a colleague or two about how you can broach this with your manager, because we need you. We need you in this workforce, and we can't afford to have these changes knock you out.
Yeah.
And so flip this around. We had a question ahead of time, was any tips for managing gift officers now forced to work remotely? And I find that interesting because most major gift work is done away from the eyes of the manager anyway. And so now that your base is at home and not in an office down the hall, your work was always out in the field. And yet I've heard from colleagues who have a different set of metrics. They're being asked to document all of their time and what they've done each hour of the day, as if they're not doing their work at all. So I'm just curious from a management standpoint, how you would handle that.
Well, that example would probably push me over the edge, to be very honest, because I'd like, a lot of the reason that we're in this business is we're more independent, and we hire for judgment. We hire for judgment. That's what we look for. And so for our managers on the phone, let's remember that we hire for judgment. And this is going to be a different time. We are going to see different productivity. I have days where I'm up, I take my shower early, and I'm doing 14-hour days and I'm cracking it. And then I have days where I'm like, this is driving me crazy. I travel a lot. I haven't been on a plane in now 6.5 weeks. And that's all I dream about is being on a plane. I love, and I want to take advantage of the time that my family's having together, but I also need to be real. And so for us managers, I would try to give space, have conversations about perhaps what is working, pull some small teams together and let them have some dialogue and connectivity. I do think being creative in the time that you're using on the phone. I have one team that I'm working with, and this wasn't my idea, but I've loved it, is that, we do a 15-minute check-in every morning, and we rotate who on the team leads that discussion. And they can lead something anything from what is your superpower, and you talk about a personal strength and a professional strength that you've discovered during this time at home, to one of our colleagues did a 15-minute presentation on all the museums that were online in this community that you could during lunch go online and pretend you're at so-and-so. I've had others where people are asking the question, how are we going to change our business and what does that look like? And you give each person a 15-minute they get to lead the brainstorming session. I was with a client yesterday where we spent an hour and a half really talking about what donor engagement and donor outreach. We looked at what have we done in the first 6 weeks and what are we going to do looking forward. Our business is changing, getting back to the road ahead. Managers use the strengths of the people on your team to ask them what's working, what's not. How do they foresee us moving forward? I think this is just such a great time to have some connectivity, because the other thing I'm finding is that people are being more honest, getting back to the last question, about what their real situation is.
Yeah.
And so we're getting to connect with our colleagues in a much more personal way than I think that we would. And so I would just encourage our managers to remember how hard it is to retain the good folks. And micromanaging is not going to do it.
No, and let's practice what we preach. If we're talking about building relationships with our donors, then building relationships with our staff comes first. And if you truly know somebody, that's where trust begins. And, micromanaging never, ever works in any life I've been in. So another question is, last week, Jim Langley made a call for collaboration between nonprofits. I'm teeing you up, Kathy, for a Jim question. What would a collaborative community event look like this fall? I say this as many organizations are having a hard time letting go of the fundraising party gala event as a means of bringing in revenue. And many are simply moving their events from spring to fall.
Yeah, so I'll try to answer both of those things. And ironically, my husband owns a event production company. So we're spending a lot of time at our house talking about what does a virtual gala look like? What does a virtual meeting look like? What does a virtual salon event look like? And there's, I think, a lot of things there. My fear is that when we cancel something, we're suggesting the way that we did business, and we just postpone, is suggesting the way that we did something. We're not taking that opportunity to look at what did we do well? What would we change during this time? And again, I think this is such an important time of reflection to be able to look at. And so I would encourage those. And I know in some cases we had to make an instant decision and move, but now take a step back and really look at what works well in that model and what would we change. As far as collaboration, I'm going to look at it from a couple different lenses. And I thought Jim's answer on this was very, very good, because I do think that we want that collaboration. I want to look at it from a skill development standpoint, as well as where are there opportunities, especially for those of us, in San Diego, it was not uncommon for a lot of us to share donors. And I would pick up the phone and call an organization that I knew was also working with that donor. And I can think of one instance in particular. We were both going in that same week. I had the appointment on Tuesday. This organization had the appointment on Monday. The ability to collaborate and talk about this donor made our ask for both organizations so much more meaningful. And it wasn't, again, about the gift. It was about the relationship and what this person could do in the community. And I think that a lot of times we think that, oh, we can't talk about this donor, we can't call each other. The same way that I think that this opportunity recently, I'm seeing a lot of shops really create much better collaboration between prospect management and donor relations and annual fund and planned giving, and really having some conversations to make sure the messages are tight. I think we can do that across our communities, whether that is, Feed America in 3 different cities, or whatever it is. Again, we need to pivot. We need to look at how can we shift our business. Yeah. And if it makes you feel uncomfortable and you call someone and they don't want to have that conversation, they're not there. Then call someone else. I just think there's so much opportunity. So I would really encourage us this is our opportunity to do things differently. I have a lot of friends that are in this business. I don't think there's a one of them that would say that everything that is happening in their organization that they like, or everything in their organization is 100% there. What I hear is we're too busy. We're focusing on things we shouldn't be focused on. So again, this is our opportunity to pull back and hope really get focused back to Jason, your point. What is the core of our work?
Yeah. So, yeah, that's very good. I think you wrap that up really well. We have held on to 200 and we still have 224 people here still with us 90 minutes into this. And I don't know that that's So I think that's should be an encouragement to you, Kathy, to Teresa, and to myself. We're very grateful that you all have held on. We are going to make this available. We should have this up on the website, this conversation that we've enjoyed here with Kathy. We should have this up sometime over the weekend. Kathy, before we let you go, would you mind just telling people how they can find you? Tell us a little bit about your firm and where they can find you on the internet and so forth. And then we'll all say goodbye.
And Kathy, I'll add to that is somebody asked about your book.
Yes, right.
Time to pitch the book, I guess.
So
At least one listener.
the second edition, so you can find the book on Amazon. So if you just put in Kathy Drucquer Duff and Productive Donor Conversations, one of those two things should come up. My firm is based in San Diego, but it is a global firm. I focus primarily on coaching, whether that be individual coaching of a campus leader, a dean, a faculty member, fundraisers, managers. I do a fair amount of training and talking about pivoting. I'm having to pivot a lot of my business from being in person to virtual, looking at different platforms and how I'll do more training virtually. And then I do some interim transition work. You can find my website at kddphilanthropy.com, and you can go on there and subscribe to my blog, or you can do it through LinkedIn. I post a blog once a month. You will find that the values that Jason, Teresa, Ann, and I, we tend to comment on each other's things. Thank you. This has been a wonderful opportunity. Always love having a conversation about our industry. The work that we do is really special. And even on days where right now I know it's tough, and some mornings it's Groundhog Day and you're like, do I really have to get out of bed and go do this again? And 16 Zoom calls. But remember why we're driven to do this. And I just applaud Jason and Teresa for bringing opportunities to have these types of conversations. They're critical. Keep having them however you have them. But remember that our work is good.
Thank you, Kathy. We've certainly enjoyed this time, and thank you to all our guests who are still with us. There's still a number of you still here with us. It has certainly been a pleasure. We'll talk to you all again soon.
Take care, everybody.